Joining me now is Roger Stone. He is a Republican strategist and a longtime friend and advisor to Donald Trump. I'm pleased to have him to talk about Donald Trump and to talk about Roger Stone. Welcome.
Great to be here.
Well, how long have you and Donald Trump known each other?
I met him in 1979 when I came to New York to organize Governor Ronald Reagan's campaign for president. I was given this card file of the friends of Ronald and Nancy Reagan in New York, and I went through the card file, and half the people in the card file were dead. The rest of them were theatrical.
The Reagans had old friends?
The rest were theatrical, agents and Broadway producers, but there was a card for Roy M. Cohen, attorney at law.
Right.
So I contacted Cohen and I pitched him on why I thought Reagan could win, and he said, "You need Donald Trump. You need Donald and Fred Trump. Do you know Donald Trump?" I said, "No, I only know who he is." So Roy set up a meeting for me with Donald. Donald said, "Okay, give me the pitch." And I told him why Reagan would win. Donald had a low regard for Jimmy Carter, and he and his father signed on our finance
So this was
committee.
in 80, so this was 36 years ago.
Yes, sir, that's right.
36 years ago. Donald Trump then was probably 35, something like
Yes.
that? Mm-hmm. 34. And when was the last time you talked to him?
Saturday.
And what was the conversation?
Well, I had gone to the rollout of Trump-Pence in New York. I actually missed my flight to Cleveland to go do that, and he was really on his game. It was the best speech I've heard him give in a long time.
Which one?
This is when he talked about, he introduced Pence to the media in New York on a Saturday morning.
Right.
But he gave a shorter version of his stump speech first, and then he pivoted to the accomplishments of Mike Pence in Indiana, and the fact that he liked Pence because he was a job creator. And he was in great spirits. I mean, I really think he's improved dramatically as a candidate. You have to remember, he's never done this before. There's a difference between being a media personality and being a candidate for President of the United States.
But being a media personality or an actor helps.
Oh, I don't think you could do if you hadn't been. I mean,
Well, that's what Ronald Reagan said.
Exactly. And I think Trump's celebrity status and his larger-than-life quality is what's drawn these enormous crowds. People want to see Donald Trump. These other guys running for president, with all due respect, they're just conventional politicians. Trump has a charisma and a star quality that is larger than all of that. And his campaign is bigger than the Republican Party, much bigger.
He's bigger than the Republican Party.
Well, I think the reform agenda that he represents is bigger than the Republican Party. Look, in my home state of Florida, 325,000 more people voted for Donald Trump than voted for Mitt Romney in the primary 4 years ago. When you look back and check on who those people are, they're people who haven't voted in recent years, or they're new voters who only registered in the last year. So I think he has an ability to draw people to the party. He also has the reach to what we used to call the Reagan Democrats. They're not Reagan Democrats anymore because that's too distant, but they have the same profile. Moderate white Democrats who are tired of the country losing jobs, tired of their communities no longer being safe, tired of the international trade deals they think are robbing our country.
These are people you call Reagan Democrats, and many of them come from the Rust Belt.
Right. You would have called them Reagan Democrats in the day.
Right.
And I also think, frankly, that Trump has a reach to African Americans and in the end to Latinos that is understated. These people want...
Well, the polls don't show that.
No, but I don't think he's had a chance to make his economic argument yet. He needs to get them on aspirational ground.
Reagan led the conservative movement, which had been begun by Bill Buckley and other people. What's the Trump movement?
It's a reform movement. It's the people who are tired of the two-party duopoly. The problems in this country, sadly, have been created by Democrats and Republicans together. And what have they given us? Endless war, erosion of our civil liberties,
Dysfunction.
massive debt and borrowing, bailouts for the swindlers on Wall Street, but no jobs for the people who need them. And our foreign policy is expensive, ineffective, and incoherent.
That's Trump's campaign speech.
Well, I learned it from him.
All right. So when you look at him today, when did you first know that he wanted to be president?
Well, I first urged him to run for president in 1988, and we made a exploratory foray to New Hampshire, where he spoke to the Portsmouth.
This is a year that George Bush, 41, was the nominee.
Right, with whom he was never terribly impressed. And a fellow named Mike Dunbar, who was a Portsmouth city councilman, started the first known Draft Trump for President committee, still with us.
At your instigation?
I suggested the trip up there, and I had friends in the state, so yes. And it was, as Trump would say, it was huge, meaning Vice President Bush had spoken the month before to the same Chamber of Commerce. He had the biggest crowd they'd ever had, about 400. Trump had 1,200 people. They had people, outside.
And what do you attribute that to?
Sizzle, the fact that he's a celebrity. He's bigger than life, even then. Then in 2000.
Well, this was before
The Apprentice.
The Apprentice.
But he was still a national figure.
Because he wrote books about the art of the deal and
right.
things like that.
And I think people identified with him. If I was successful, that's how I would want to live.
So that failed.
That failed.
Did the dream to be president die with it?
No, actually, I think he was just toying with it at the time.
Toying.
And he enjoys publicity, as you may have noticed. But in 2000, it was a bit more serious. The Reform Party was entitled to $58 million in federal funding for their nominee. Donald Trump, being a businessman, loved the idea of OPM, running for president on other people's money. And Ross Perot and Governor Jesse Ventura, a good friend of mine, good friend of Donald's, was urging him to run. But at the end, he decided correctly that the country is unlikely to elect a third-party candidate. The obstacles are just too great, particularly since the Presidential Commission on Debates is not appointed by the president, is not a commission, and is most definitely not about debates.
And this is 1988 we're talking about.
This is 2000.
This is 2000.
Then 3 years ago, he considered very seriously challenging Mitt Romney. He was briefly ahead of the pack in the polls, and then he elected not to run. So this has been 28 years in the making, as far as I'm concerned.
So he's been thinking about this for a long time and planning, because he seemed to get serious after 2012.
Yes.
Really get serious.
Yes.
And say, this is doable. And what advice did you give him? Because at the same time, he began toying with the birther movement.
Well, I think there were two other factors.
Many people think you might have been involved in that.
No,
that
actually,
you led him to it.
No, that would be inaccurate. Nobody puts ideas or words in Donald Trump's mouth. It just doesn't work that way. But
you don't? Well, you would hope so. You would hope he'd be listening to new ideas.
He's not a conventional politician. That doesn't mean he doesn't listen to advice, and he does consult a broad cross-section of advisors. But at the end of the day, to steal a phrase from George W. Bush, there's only one decider. And Trump is not a confection. He is not scripted or programmed or coached. That's why he's done so well. People see him as authentic.
Well,
as
that is
genuine.
also because there are a lot of people at this convention are saying he needs the party. Yes, it's a movement, but he also needs the party. He needs to reach out to the people that you know in the Republican Party, the people that Paul Manafort knows in the Republican Party, that your other partner, Charles Black, knows in the Republican Party, that you guys were together and now do different things, but that he needs to reach out. And he needs Paul Ryan, and he needs Mitch McConnell, and he needs Republican chairmen in states across this United States. And he doesn't need to get into a fight with the governor of Ohio.
Well, in all honesty, the governor of Ohio signed a pledge to endorse the nominee, which he has not honored. And then secondarily, Charlie, I must tell you, I see this election very differently than any past election that I've been involved in.
In what way?
I think this election is the leadership of the Republican and Democratic Party, which has given us 30 years of policy failure, versus Donald Trump and everyone else. Every Republican president, Lincoln, McKinley, Eisenhower, Nixon, Reagan, has remade the party in his own image. And so shall Donald Trump. We are not going to be the Wall Street Party anymore. We are not going to be the party of special interests anymore. We're going to go back to being the mainstream party.
So the opposition in this election, as far as you're concerned, is the establishment in both parties.
Yes,
it's a Republican establishment, Mitch McConnell and Ryan and the rest of them, as well as the establishment of the Democratic Party, as well as the establishment of Wall Street.
In a certain sense, I think it is an insider-outsider election. Donald Trump is the nominee because he's an outsider. And the voters chose an outsider because they just have no more confidence in the career politicians who, as Trump always says, all they get is talk, but no action.
But does Trump see it as a movement, that he's head of a movement?
I think he said that several times. He said, look, I'm just a messenger, as he said Saturday in New York. Yes, I understand that this is a reform movement that is bigger than the Republican Party, bigger than both parties. The voters are fed up. I've been involved in presidential politics. This is be the 9th campaign I've been involved in, starting with Richard Nixon, through Ronald Reagan, with Senator Bob Dole, who I commend for being here. The guy is really a patriot and a party regular. Notice the Bushes are not here. That's because the Bushes are about themselves. They got very wealthy.
Mitt Romney's not here either.
Well, that's fine. But those people are discredited with the American people. They had their shot, and they lost.
George Bush 43 is discredited by the American people.
Yes, because he led us to a war with no purpose.
And 41 is discredited by the American people.
I don't think he is very popular with the American people. He's not Ronald Reagan. So the point I guess I would make is that particularly Bush, the son, not having his endorsement, I think, is inconsequential. Sure, there will be a few Republicans, country club Republicans, who won't vote for Donald Trump, but we'll more than make up with them with new voters and millennials and people who've never been in this process before.
Let me talk about Donald Trump in this election cycle gaining traction.
Yes.
When he went out there and talked about immigration, there was also an appeal he had to what people call nativist. There was an appeal to what people call white supremacist. And they responded to that. And early articles pointed that out. Tell me how much you knew about that. Tell me how much you approved of that.
Sure. I noticed the phenomena.
Right.
But as Ronald
And why
Reagan,
didn't he disavow them?
well, as Ronald Reagan once said, if somebody chooses to support me, that means they are supporting my views.
He
That
did
doesn't mean
indeed
that
say
I'm
that.
supporting their views.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of people wanted him to denounce David Duke at the time.
I think once he figured out who David Duke was, he denounced him.
He did not know who David Duke was.
He's not a political junkie like you and I, Charlie. No, I really
You don't think he knew him, even though David Duke has been a phenomenon.
I don't think he heard it the first time.
But he does he not? Are you basically saying if racist and white supremacists and others want to support him, that's fine with him?
Well, I think
that he's basically saying, you're buying me, I'm not buying you. But he's therefore condoning in some way?
No, I don't think
so.
He's not responsible for their views. You cannot tell people how to vote. But you say nativist as if and some use the term nationalist as
Right.
it is as pejorative.
No, I'm not. I'm just describing the people that were early part of giving him traction in this election year.
Look, I think that we're talking about a very small fraction of people. Charlie, if you go to a Klan meeting today, the majority of people there are government informants that are funded by the FBI. So this is not an important or significant part of the Trump movement. There are always a few kooks out there. You can't tell people how to vote, but that again means they're supporting Trump, not that Trump subscribes to their views.
You know the family quite well.
Yes, I do.
Tell me about the family.
Well, I knew Donald's parents very well. Fred Trump was a great, great man. Very quiet, very thrifty, very unassuming, but a very hardworking
And
guy.
his influence on Donald Trump?
Thrift, very definitely. His drive, his stick-to-itiveness. Fred Trump was a great man. Mary Trump was...
Fred Trump's fortune was in Queens. Donald Trump decided he'd go to Manhattan.
Yes, because it was a bigger oyster. It was a bigger world. But Fred and Mary Trump, both Republicans, living in a borough that was run by a Democratic machine. Fred Trump was a personal friend of Barry Goldwater, one of the major financiers of Barry Goldwater's campaign. In 1964, $100,000 was like $1 million today. I know his sister, Marianne Trump Barry, who is a great federal judge. One of the best appointments Ronald Reagan ever made.
And the children?
Ivanka she's the Renaissance woman. She manages to be a wife, a mother, help at the Trump organization and run her own lines of business. She's incredibly physically fit. She's gorgeous. She's always chicly dressed. She was on my international best dressed list this last year, which I put out every New Year's Day. She's an amazing woman. She manages to balance it all. At the same time, she's perfectly normal.
She's
approachable.
closest to him.
I can't say that because they're
that.
very private people. But all of his children, Donnie Jr. gave one of the best speeches I've seen, and I've been in this business 40 years. I'd like Donnie to run against Chelsea Clinton for Congress out there in Westchester.
Is that likely to happen?
Well, I think Donnie could have a career if he wanted one, and I think Chelsea's going to do that.
What role do you expect to play if Trump wins?
I'm certainly not going to join government because, let's face it, I'm entirely unconfirmable by the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
But
why is that?
Look, Charlie, one man's dirty trick is another man's civic participation. Politics is not beanbag. Yeah. I spent 40 years in the corroded rectum of the two-party system. Politics isn't elegant and it isn't pretty. I worked in the U.S. Senate. I worked in the U.S. House. Every president we've had talks about federal spending being cut. But every dollar in the federal budget that's wasteful was put there by someone, and they're going to protect it. Because Donald Trump is not beholden to any special interest, because he can't be bought and he can't be bullied, maybe you'll have a president who can actually cut federal spending. And then we don't have to talk about cutting Social Security or benefits to people who really need them. So I'm a keen observer of the system. It's a dirty system. It's a rigged system. Trump is right.
And you have to get dirty to play in it?
You have to play by the rules as they exist. And I have done that for 40 years.
The two of you have had a rocky relationship, though, have you not?
We had a brief period of estrangement.
Only one?
Only one. We only one. I left the campaign. I gave my very first surrogate speech for Trump, speaking out for him the very next day.
Why did you leave the campaign?
Because Donald Trump had a vision for his campaign that was different than mine.
And how was that?
He was in favor of an entirely communications-based strategy. I favored a more traditional strategy, one that included polling and analytics and targeting and paid media and all the traditional tools. He was right. I was wrong.
But can he be right in a general election?
Well,
you think that you cannot have paid media in a general election? Because evidently he's going out trying to raise a lot of money, and people say he's going to need a lot of money in paid media and also get out the vote and a lot of other things that you can't produce just by rallies.
I think that the campaign will be adequate in terms of identifying and turning out their vote. But there is a phenomena here that where this race has been roiled at key points by events that are beyond anybody's control, that are far more important than paid television.
And they are?
Paris,
Right.
San Bernardino, Orlando, Nice, Dallas, all these things have a tendency to focus the country on the issues, and they have the inadvertent effect of having helped drive Donald Trump's message that we need security. We need to secure our borders, that we are up against an implacable enemy that wants to destroy us.
Does he remind you of Nixon? Because Paul Manafort has said that Nixon's speech in 1968 in Miami is one that they admire, that they have read, and is in part a guide to what they want to say.
Yeah, that's a very moving speech. It's the speech in which...
What is it about that speech that they like?
I think it's probably the close where he says, we can have a job for every American. We can rebuild our military strength. We can protect our environment. We can have a new American revolution. That's what we're talking about here. Donald Trump is the can-do candidate. He's not a pessimist. He's an optimist. And he will deal with some very
It's also
tough
about
problems.
law and order and silent majority and other
Yes, and those, I think, help sum up the fact that Trump is a pragmatic conservative who is not politically correct and is prepared to take on the country's toughest problems.
things. Another relationship, you and Paul Manafort.
Yes, we met at the 1970 Republican State Convention. Connecticut is one of the last states in the country that selects its statewide candidates by convention. This is really where Manafort, between that and the Young Republicans, got his convention management skills. When I ran for Young Republican National Chairman in 1977, Paul Manafort was my campaign manager. We were together in College Republicans. We were together in Young Republicans. We were together right up until 1976. Then I worked for Governor Ronald Reagan. He worked for President Gerald Ford. After Jerry Ford lost and it became clear that Governor Reagan would come back and try again, one of the very first hires was Paul Manafort. So we worked together in the 80 Reagan campaign, then the 84 Reagan campaign, and we became partners at Black, Manafort, and Stone in 1981.
Black, Roger Stone, and Manafort. Paul
We all
Manafort.
have our 15 minutes one more time.
Okay, so it is said that you recommended to Donald Trump that he hire Paul Manafort.
I was among those who recommended it. Paul and Donald had a relationship. They met during the time that Black, Manafort, and Stone represented the Trump Organization. I represented Donald on a bunch of arcane federal issues having to do with gaming and building heights and the FAA and so on. But they knew each other casually, but they also had mutual friends beyond me. So I was among those.
And what has he brought to the campaign?
He's an adult. And he has deep experience at all phases.
Corey
of
was
this.
not an adult.
No, Corey was an advanced man. We was Bob Haldeman without the charm.
Yeah, Bob Haldeman had charm.
That's the point.
I know.
We're talking about apples and oranges. Paul Manafort has elected presidents.
But you
around
guys
the world.
are of the establishment. You are.
Not me.
Well.
I supported Gary Johnson against Mitt Romney 3 years ago.
And so how well do you think Gary Johnson could do this time?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that
Gary Johnson, Libertarian candidate, along with Bill Weld.
yes, two guys that are friends of mine and for whom I have a high regard. Isn't it interesting that 4 years ago they could get no media coverage whatsoever? Nobody was interested.
Yeah.
The majority of voters.
Well,
didn't
Weld
even
wasn't
know
part
about
of it last year.
Okay, but
4 years,
they had a ticket and they had an esteemed former judge from California, Judge Gray.
And now they're getting attention because
because the media perceive them drawing votes from Donald Trump.
Will they?
In the end, I think what they're going to find is that they draw equally from both Trump and Clinton because the Libertarian Party has both a left and a right wing. There are right libertarians and left libertarians. So those voters who favor the legalization of drugs, for example, will come from the left.
So when Paul Manafort says to Donald Trump, as he does, you have to be more presidential, do you agree with him?
I think that.
Or are you more let Trump be Trump, less than Paul is?
Well, I am
Yes.
there is only one Trump, and Trump will make those decisions. I do think that he listens to a broad cross-section
So
of
he does
advice.
listen.
But if you take away the spontaneity and the authenticity of Trump, then he'll just be another boring political figure. Maybe there's a better way to say certain things that he's already saying. This is a learning process for him.
So all that lashing out at fellow Republicans and giving them nicknames and insulting them was just fine with you because you think it proved beneficial.
It worked. And frankly, Jeb Bush was not fit to be president. So I think
That was not his argument. His argument was about energy.
Well, he had no energy. But Trump has an innate ability to figure out what your weakness
And
is.
guess what? Lying Ted Cruz is on the podium this evening.
That I would not have let Fat Dracula on the podium if it were me,
You were opposed to Ted Cruz coming.
personally. But I speak only for myself.
So it shows that Donald Trump doesn't listen to everything you recommend.
That's for darn sure.
Why did he select Mike Pence?
Mike Pence, I think, is the ideal running mate. First of all, in selecting a vice president, you want somebody who's not going to upstage you. Want someone who's not going to contradict you the way that Cabot Lodge contradicted Nixon. A week after Cabot Lodge is selected in 1960 for vice president, in Chicago, on the very day that Nixon is campaigning in Atlanta, Cabot Lodge says the Nixon cabinet will have a Negro in it, which was the vernacular,
Right.
an African American. Nixon was in Atlanta, is forced to put out a statement saying no cabinet member will be selected on the basis of the color of their skin. It's a classic example of why you don't want a running mate who's going to make it up as they're going along. Mike Pence is a solid guy of character.
He will not embarrass Donald
Yeah,
Trump.
not embarrass Donald Trump. He understands that this is
But they don't have the same
supporting-
views on trade and a lot of other things.
Well, but the vice presidential candidate's job is to support the views of the presidential candidate. George Bush was pro-abortion when Ronald Reagan selected him. George Bush was against tax cuts when Ronald Reagan selected him. For 8 years, he was a loyal
so
vice
there
president.
you go with the president that you most admire, and secondly, his choice of a future president who you admire a lot less.
Well, yes, but because it means that Ronald Reagan was a pragmatist, and he understood.
That's the point. Is Donald Trump a pragmatist?
Most
Does Donald Trump, because it has been argued that he operates more by instinct and intuition rather than listening to what people have told him
Well, he listens
and have
he,
advised him.
he operates more on instinct instead of being guided by focus groups and polls that tell him what to say in order to be popular. I would argue this is one of Hillary Clinton's greatest problems. Everything the woman says has been focus group, polled, roundtabled, put into committees, and what you get out is mush. It sounds stale and phony because it is.
What role will you be playing in the campaign?
FOT, friend of Trump. You know, I'm kind of like.
In other words, you'll do whatever he asks.
Well, of course, I would do anything they ask, but I'm kind of like Sidney Blumenthal. I have no title, I have no line responsibilities, but I have access to all the right people.
And a lot of access to the candidate.
He returns my call if I call him. I have enormous affection and respect for Donald Trump.
What do you talk
We've been
about?
friends for 40 years.
What do you talk about mostly?
Politics.
The campaign?
Politics.
Does he call you out and say, what do you think I should do here?
Once in a while, but you know, sometimes I call him with an idea. I'm a prolific writer of memos.
Yes.
And I have been writing memos for Donald Trump for 40 years, and I know his style. So I know how to put together a brief, staccato piece of paper that, you know, that will inform him without being overpowering.
Now,
You pass him a 40-page white paper on the economy, he's not likely to
He's
read
not
it.
like to read it. Here's what you have said. I think the Trump campaign is short-sighted in not encouraging donors to give to reputable super PACs?
Yes, I do. I think that Donald's aversion to super PACs has been the fact that they are often funded by special interests with an agenda. But
well,
now,
and he has a history in this campaign of criticizing them, saying that, almost that they're evil and that they have bought politicians and.
for that reason. But
Yeah.
you can't go into an election with Hillary Clinton, who has $45, $50 million in super PACs, with one arm tied behind your back.
And you can't self-fund the presidential campaign unless you are richer than Donald Trump.
Right. So I think they are a necessary evil. And all you have to do here is to say that your super PAC will not take money from lobbyists, but from individuals. But I think if it's an evil, it's a necessary evil. And there are reputable super PACs out there, and frankly, I think the campaign ultimately will need their help, or they'll just get out communicated.
It is said that traditional donors are avoiding Donald Trump.
Yes, but the good news is that
And
there
a
are
lot of them have contributed significantly to super PACs.
Yes, but at the same time, there are new donors who've never given in politics before who are enthused by Donald Trump. So the super PACs can raise money, and hopefully some of them, the more reputable ones that are well run and actually know what they're doing, will raise some money.
What kind of bump do you think will come out of this convention?
I think it'll be significant, and I
Well,
think,
let's assume he's 3 to 4 points behind now.
okay, then I think he'll be even or 3 or 4 points
But
ahead.
is that what you assume? He's 3 to 4 points behind now?
Not necessarily. I think he might
Around
be
3?
I'm not sure. I think he could be in a dead heat. I think he's going to be. I think he's in the margin of error right now. But
In Ohio, in Florida.
Florida, I've seen survey research that has him a
ahead.
couple points ahead.
You're right.
So, but just picking up some additional Republicans will put him ahead in this race. By the way, Hillary Clinton has the mirror image problem. Bernie Sanders may be on board, but that doesn't mean all of his supporters are. And she has to increase her percentage of the vote among Democrats in order to be competitive.
The argument goes that he really does have to, as George Bush did in the second campaign in 2004, turn out white Americans.
Yes.
All right, so let me just turn this around. You're being as candid as you can. What do you worry about with respect to this Donald Trump in this campaign? Where do you think the great risk is?
Well, one risk I worry about is the fact that he's taking his life in his hands every time he goes out in campaigns.
So you worry about assassination?
I myself, just as a proponent, get 10 to 13 death threats a week, and I'm not even an official member of his campaign.
How are they expressed?
Usually anonymous phone calls with no caller ID, a male voice, just the standard stuff. I've reported this to the authorities. There's not much you can do
Is
about
Donald
it.
Trump getting a lot of
I have to assume that
threats?
if I'm getting a handful, he's getting hundreds. This is a polarizing candidacy. By the way, I'm sure.
It's a polarizing candidacy.
Yes. By the way, I'm sure
Why do you-
Hillary Clinton's
Is
getting
too.
them as well.
So you worry about assassination.
Just because I have great affection for him and his family, I have to worry about that.
What else do you worry about?
I think that the Clintons will always be better funded than the Trump campaign, and that
So
Trump
you worry about money.
Trump is never going to have the well-oiled political machine that the Clintons have built. On the other hand, I kind of liken this to the American colonists and the British Army.
You liken this to an insurgency.
Yes, and I think that the Trump campaign can be more lithe, can move faster, can hit harder, and can make decisions on a snap basis, where her campaign is hidebound. We can't do that yet. We haven't polled it. We haven't focus grouped it. We haven't sent it out for a round of meetings. Stale and old thinking.
Are
That's
you
been
the
agenda.
architect of this idea of attacking Bill Clinton's infidelities?
No, I have nothing wrong with his infidelity. I believe that his assaults of women, non-consensual sex, is an issue, and therefore, as Hillary Clinton said, these women deserve to be believed. Yes, Juanita Broaddrick, Kathleen Willey, Paula Jones, Christy Zurcher, Eileen Wellstone, Liz
You
Ward
seem to
Grayson.
know them well. Does
I've
that
written a
make-
book about it. Read my book, The
Okay.
Clintons' War on Women.
And you expect Donald Trump to make that a big issue in the campaign?
It is not just Bill's assault of women, it's Hillary's role in bullying, in intimidating, and threatening these women. Read what the women have written and said themselves. I believe the women.
And it's a campaign issue that Donald Trump will make.
It is not about marital infidelity. It is not about adultery. It is not about mistresses or girlfriends. It's about something far darker, sexual assault and cover-up.
Why has it never been proven in court?
Actually, he paid Paula Corbin Jones $875,000 to settle that case. Why did NBC sit on the Juanita Broaddrick interview for months and months and months and months before they finally aired it, and only then after the impeachment vote? Back in the day when we only had 3 television networks, suppressing news was pretty easy. Today, no news can be suppressed, so these women will have an opportunity. In this case, it is the court of public opinion that is important. I have no doubt the Clintons will deny it, but let these ladies speak, then the American voters can decide who's telling the truth.
There is also this. There was a Brexit vote.
Yes.
That was about a revolt in terms of people who felt like they had too much immigration, who felt like that there was too many, that they were not doing as well as their parents had done, that their income was being reduced rather than enhanced, who felt like their lives were controlled outside of their own sovereign and from Brussels. Donald Trump looked at that and seemed to identify with it. And that's when I began to hear the idea of movement, that this is a movement.
Yeah, Donald Trump is a nationalist. That is a globalist.
He's a populist.
But is it a rejection of globalism?
When you look at him and when you look at you and when you look at where it is, I just want one more time, the idea is that you think that he ought to continue doing what he's doing because it was a winning formula, and that anything about becoming more mainstream other than raising money might be detrimental to him.
I think this is a movement. I think some are misreading the mood of the voters. Are there times when he could put things slightly differently than he puts them? Yes. But
what's the best example of that?
Well, for example, we went he criticized the judge in the Trump University case. Now, if he said he should be...
Why did it take him so long? Everybody instinctively knew that was wrong.
Because he's not politically
correct. You
correct.
knew that was wrong.
No, hold on. What he should have said is the judge should be recused because he's a Hillary Clinton contributor. The judge could be recused because he is a Democrat. The judge should be recused because he belongs to La Raza, a radical Hispanic group.
But he didn't say any of that.
The judge
he said
should be recused because he has a personal relationship with the plaintiff's lawyer.
That's not what he
said,
though.
But instead he said he was
a
a
Mexican.
I wouldn't have said it that way.
And it was wrong to say it that way.
I think he would probably admit that himself at this point.
But it took him a while to do it, which why people
underlying
wonder,
point was not,
where was his instinct?
The underlying point is still the same. The judge had a bias, and by the way,
it wasn't the bias he was speaking to.
And if we're going to talk about university scandals, where's the coverage of the Clintons' scam that they're running at Laureate Education? At the same time, if we're going to talk about Trump University, let's talk about Clinton University.
So you think the media is terribly biased in favor of Hillary Clinton?
Obviously not monolithically, but overwhelmingly, yes. Because most reporters and most editors and most desks are Democrats. You know this.
Thank you for coming.
Good to be here.
Roger Stone.